Okay.
Can you hear us now, Andy?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Thank you. The first thing on our agenda is a public hearing. This public hearing held by the Louisville Metro Air Pollution Control Board is called to order and has been held pursuant to the KRS Chapter 77 and district regulations. Notice of this hearing has been published pursuant to state law. This public hearing is being held by video teleconference due to the COVID-19 outbreak. Instructions on making written and oral statements by video teleconference have been distributed. Oral statements must be presented today. All statements should be concise. All statements will become part of the hearing record. There is one agreed board order to be reviewed today. Would the staff please present the agreed board order with Clarence Corporation, Mr. Gravett.
Oh, Andy, if Steve is on the conference, could you promote him, please?
Thank you, Mr. Hilton.
Thank you. Okay.
The district brings for the board's consideration an agreement with the Clariant Corporation, which manufactures catalysts at two plants in Louisville, known as the Clariant West plant in the Park Hill neighborhood, and Clariant South plant located on Crittenden Drive near the Muhammad Ali International Airport. Catalysts are substances such as an element or compound that increase the rate of a chemical reaction. Both plants are subject to district-issued Title V operating permits and the Strategic Toxic Air Reduction, or STAR programs. The company's operating permits limit multiple pollutants, including opacity, particulate matter, hazardous air pollutants, and air toxics, and requires monitoring, record keeping, and reporting to demonstrate that air pollution control equipment is being operated properly. The district alleges that Clariant failed to operate their chemical plants as allowed in their Title V permits. In May of 2020, Clariant timely submitted the West Plant 2019 Annual Compliance Certification to the district. In this report, Clariant detailed numerous instances of failing to comply with permit conditions relating to maintenance, inspections, recording, reporting, and general operation. The district issued a notice of violation for these violations in December of 2020. Also in December of 2020, Clariant submitted a number of permit applications, including updated STAR demonstrations for both the West and South plants. In a series of letters following the submittal of these applications, the company disclosed additional deviations discovered while conducting a review of process operations at the plants. These deviations included unpermitted equipment, changes in control devices, and changes in plant operation that should have been reported to the district earlier. In addition to the letters reporting deviations, the company continued to report violations of their Title V permits in their 2020 annual compliance certifications and semi-annual compliance reports. These included failing to comply with permit conditions relating to maintenance, inspections, record keeping, reporting, and general operation. District permitting and compliance staff worked with Clariant throughout 2021 to determine the extent of the violations and their resolution, including identifying and requiring necessary corrective actions. On January 6, 2022, the district issued 2 additional notices of violation, one to each Clariant plant, for the violations that had been reported at the end of 2020 and throughout 2021. During 2020 and 2021, the source retained the services of multiple environmental consultants, conducted multiple rounds of stack testing, and submitted numerous updated applications, environmental acceptability demonstrations required by the STAR program, and other necessary compliance demonstrations. Periodic reports required by their Title V permits have shown improved compliance with the Clean Air Act, the district's regulations, including the STAR program, and the plant's Title V permits. The company has agreed to pay a penalty of $481,500 to resolve these notices of violation. The district recommends the board adopt the order as proposed. Director Hamilton has additional comments to make on this order.
Thank you, Steve. And good morning, board members. Based on the information provided during stack testing of the emissions control equipment at both plants and information included in the applications and demonstrations, the district is preparing to issue permits to both plants to properly permit equipment, changes in control devices, and other changes in plant operations that meet the requirements of the Clean Air Act, the district's regulations, including the Strategic Toxic Air Reduction Program, and our permitting program requirements, but these changes should have been permitted before being constructed, installed, or modified. We'll share that information with the board when those permits are proposed for public comment. Thank you.
Mr. Gary, has a representative of Clarence Corporation registered to make a statement this morning?
No, Mr. Hilton.
Has any member of the public registered to make a statement this morning?
No, Mr. Hilton.
Has any member of the public submitted a written statement?
No, Chairman Hilton.
Are there any members of the public on this teleconference or wish to make a statement? If so, raise your hand and you will be called upon. This is a feature on your phone that you can find by hitting star three if joining by phone, and you will be called upon.
I see no raised hands, Chairman Hilton.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any questions by board members? I would just like to make a statement as chairman of the board that this is our third agreed board order. I think, yeah, we've had two previous ones, March 16, 2016, and we had another one, 12/19/2018. And it seems a little bit troubling to me that something is amiss with this. So I would like for Mrs. Hampton or someone from your staff to forward a copy of Regulation 2.09 to all the board members so they can have a chance to review this regulations.
We'll be happy to do that, Chairman Hilton, after the meeting.
Okay.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
I'd like to make a comment.
Yes.
I believe this is not the first fine to Clarence Corporation. Am I correct in that?
You're correct. Right. We've had two previous ones.
So is there anything in our current the latest agreement with the fine that there is some kind of escalation? Should there be another additional, infraction in the future? So that way it's not just, each one becomes more exponential in terms of their fines or problems.
Dr. May, this is Hamilton. This agreed board order does not include stipulated penalties. Those are typically used when there are outstanding corrective measures as a way to be sure that those corrective actions get taken care of. Because there are no outstanding corrective actions in this case other than those that will be addressed through the issuance of the permit, we did not include those stipulated penalties here. As a practice with our air pollution control regulations, when a company has similar violations, we take that into account as a history of noncompliance in assessing the civil penalty. Chairman Hilton has asked that we send a copy of APCD Regulation 2.09 to the board, and I'm going to mangle the title, but essentially there are provisions in Regulation 2.09 that would allow the board to rescind an operating permit for a facility. So should there be additional violations, it could be that the district in our professional judgment believe that it's not a repeat nature type of violation, and that it's appropriate to settle that through a civil penalty, and we would recommend that to the board, where the board does have the authority to consider the source's operating permit and whether to continue that permit. That's a tool in the toolbox, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I just, you know, that is like an all or none, you know, and so I just want, you know, so I was trying to see if there was any other process, you know, to make it, you know, more onerous for them, you know, should they just, and I don't know, you know, whether it's truly an active decision, but certainly, even if it's by neglect, you know, it still has impact.
Absolutely.
I agree.
So I do want
I
to
agree.
just point out before we move on, Carl, that the last civil penalty that we assessed was for $40,000. In this case, the settlement amount is $481,500. So clearly, this has escalated in terms of the size of the violation and the size of the civil penalty that we've assessed.
Yeah. Well, thank you. But, you know, I was a little troubled when I read the agreed board order. It seems to me, it signals to me personally that there's a lack of understanding of their operating permit, and also no attention to detail within their permit. And that's what I've got when I've read this latest board order. And also, I'd like to thank the Clark Corporation and the district here working out the agreed board order with us, and hopefully we won't see any more in the future.
Thank you, Chairman Hilton. This was a very complex matter, and our staff, both from our compliance, enforcement, and our permitting staff, with a lot of assistance from our county attorney, worked diligently to very timely bring this matter to the board.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that on behalf of the board. Any other questions regarding this agreed board order from board members? If not, I will call the regular meeting of the Louisville Metro Air Pollution Control Board to order. Due to the COVID-19 outbreak, we are conducting the monthly board meeting today by video teleconference. First thing, I will conduct a roll call of board members that are present on this teleconference. When I call your name, please say yes. Steve Sullivan.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Coburn. Thank you. Dr. May.
Yes.
Candace White.
Yes.
Thank you. And Marissa Neal.
Yes.
Thank you. Mrs. Hampton, do we have any introductions this morning?
No, sir.
Thank you. Do we have any public recognitions this morning?
We do not.
Thank you. We at the looking at the approval of the minutes. The minutes of the regular meeting held on January 19th, 2022 were distributed electronically for your review. Are there any changes or upgrades to the minutes by board members? Hearing none, the minutes are approved with no corrections. Thank you. We at the, Mr. Gurry, has anyone wish to make a comment this morning?
No, Chairman Howard.
Thank you. Has anyone provided written comments?
No, Chairman Howard.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public that wish to make a comment? If so, please raise your hand. If you have your phone, there's a way to be recognized if you wish to make a statement this morning.
I see no raised hands, Chairman Hilton.
Thank you. That completes the public portion of the meeting. We're moving on. There is no unfinished business this morning. New business, we have agreed board order with Clarent Corporation. The district has recommended that the board adopt the order with Clarent Corporation. Is there a motion to adopt the order? Do I have a second? Mr. Sullivan? Thank you. Any discussions from board members regarding this agreed board order? If not, I will now take a roll call. Please unmute your mic and say yes if you wish to adopt the proposed amendments to the regulation, and no if you do not. Steve Sullivan.
We're voting on the agreed order, right?
We're voting on the agreed board order of Clarent Corporation.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Dr. Colbert? Yes. Thank you. Dr. May?
Yes.
Thank you. Candace White?
Yes.
Thank you. And Marissa Neal?
Yes.
Thank you. The agreed board order of Clarent Corporation is adopted. Thank you very much. We now at the committee reports. No committees met in the last month. Staff report, Mrs. Hamilton. We have the director report.
Thank you, Chairman Hilton, and good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to report that Louisville's COVID positivity rate is greatly reduced from its high earlier this year. In fact, with Metro government, we've been meeting weekly with a COVID update, and we're now going to push those back to just twice a month. That's a really good sign, and I'm hopeful that we will soon be able to meet in person. Currently, our rate, though, is still elevated in the red zone. As a result of that, our staff continue teleworking, while our monitoring and our compliance staff continue to work in the field, and our office remains open. If you do choose to visit our office, we ask that folks please practice social distancing measures, remain 6 feet apart from staff and employees and others in the building, and wear your mask. But again, I'm really hopeful that we'll begin to relax some of these restrictions and that we will be able to meet in person in the near future. Till then, be vigilant, get a shot if you haven't had one for flu, and a booster if you need one. Wear your mask, wash your hands, and I really hope to see you all soon. If you have any questions about vaccinations, testing sites, safe housing, and essential needs for people quarantining, our partners at Louisville Public Health and Wellness at 502-912-8598 can provide more information. In the meantime, please continue to review the agenda each month for instructions on how to attend and participate in the Air Pollution Control Board's upcoming meetings. I feel like that's my public service announcement for the day, so I'm kind of glad to get that out of the way, and we'll be very happy when I no longer have to remark about COVID. So last night, Chairman Hilton, Michelle King, APCD's Executive Administrator and Director of Program Planning, and I attended the West Jefferson County Community Task Force regular meeting where the Louisville Water Company and MSD provided a really informative presentation on PFAS and PFOAs. We've talked about these chemicals before. They're the forever chemicals, the per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. There are thousands of these chemicals. They can be found in drinking water, biosolids from wastewater, which MSD actually produces here in Louisville and sells as a product called Louisville Green, contaminated soil, firefighting foam, food packaging, personal care products, including that long-wearing lipstick, and furniture. Currently, EPA is preparing plans for us to better understand these chemicals, and that's really kind of the bad news part of this story. There are thousands of these chemicals in commerce, and they are not well understood. Presently, we have information on only a few of the thousands of these chemicals that are in commerce, And those studies that we do have linked exposure to reproductive effects, some developmental effects or delays in children, including low birth weight, accelerated puberty, among other things, potential increased risk for some cancers, potential interference with your body's hormones, and also possibly a link to increased cholesterol levels and a risk of obesity. With that in mind, this is really a new and emerging contaminant area of focus. US EPA has started a number of regulatory initiatives, and we've talked about some of those, but I do want to go ahead and cover those again. Right now, EPA is putting together a program to really comprehensively regulate these chemicals and their impacts in air, water, and land from cradle to grave. And this includes developing drinking water standards for 2 of the most prevalent PFAS compounds, and in the meantime, continuing to rely on the health advisory level for PFAS of 70 parts per trillion. That works out to about 70 nanograms per liter in drinking water. We're really talking about a very small amount of this chemical in drinking water as being found to be acceptable. Adding additional PFAS to the toxics release inventory and promulgating rules to prohibit the use of certain of these chemicals. This will allow EPA, by adding these new chemicals to the TRI, that toxics release inventory, to see which industries are emitting or discharging them and where they may be used throughout the country. Establishing nationwide drinking water monitoring, expanding research to further understand and manage the risks from PFAS, including improved detection and measurement methods, and effective treatment and remediation. One of the points that the water company made last night during their presentation is that when you're looking for things in parts per trillion, that's a really low measure. And some of our equipment and the methodologies that we use to measure other contaminants don't go down that low. So this is a challenge not just in terms of how many chemicals there are, but one of technology also. How do we see where these chemicals are? And then what technology can we use to reduce their risk? In June of 2021, EPA restarted the process to designate certain PFOA and PFASs as hazardous substances under the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, or CERCLA. That will allow them again to better understand the number and location of sites where these chemicals may be emitted or discharged. Some of these substances may also be designated as hazardous air pollutants. In October of last year, EPA announced important steps towards evaluating the existing data on 4 of these chemicals under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, that's RCRA, which would strengthen the cleanup of contamination across the country through the hazardous waste corrective action process. And lastly, EPA recently added 4 additional PFAS to TRI. Facilities will need to track these emissions and their discharges of these chemicals in 2022 and report those in June of 2023. I mention this because there's going to be a lot of work in this area. It is a new and emerging contaminant. The scope of this particular class of chemicals is so widespread and used in so many different commercial products that we're just going to be, for the next decade or so, learning more about these. How EPA chooses to manage these is going to be a challenge. It'll be a challenge for companies and for communities and for regulatory agencies. We will keep the board up to date on EPA's rulemaking at future board meetings as it progresses, particularly as it impacts air pollution. Are there any questions about that?
Any questions,
Moving on.
board members?
Very good. On February 2nd, Michelle King and I attended the Board of Health's monthly meeting. There, I was asked to share information about the district's charge, our current priorities as they impact public health, and any policy advocacy asks for the Board of Health in a tight 20-minute time frame. Luckily, I was also able to provide the Board of Health with a pre-read that included a simple description of the district, as well as some examples of how our work relates to public health and also its impact in vulnerable neighborhoods. So, I wanted to share some of that presentation with you so that you could see what I shared with them, what I asked of them, and then to fill you in on some of our joint upcoming work. So, Mr. Purdon, if you could share my presentation. Andy has gamely offered to drive for me today, and I truly appreciate that. So, as many of you know, the district has worked to make Louisville's air cleaner for more than 70 years now. We implement the Federal Clean Air Act in Louisville, Jefferson County, and we work in partnership with US EPA, the Kentucky Division for Air Quality, and the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. The district is part of Louisville Metro government. Our leadership is appointed by the mayor, and regulatory oversight is provided by you, the Louisville Metro Air Pollution Control Board. You all are unique within Louisville Metro government in that you, not Metro Council, pass the rules that clean the air here in Jefferson County. All other Metro agencies who need rules, Metro Council is their regulatory authority. Air pollution affects everyone. I'm not preaching to the choir here. In the short term, air pollution can make it difficult to breathe when you're trying to enjoy outdoor activities. In the long term, it can damage the lungs and cause or contribute to a myriad of chronic diseases. The most vulnerable people are senior citizens, very young children, and people who have respiratory ailments such as asthma, emphysema, and COPD. All human activities add gases and particles to the air we breathe. When those gases and particles or air pollutants accumulate in the air high enough concentrations, they can harm us and our environment. So, in response, Congress passed the Clean Air Act, and the EPA was established to implement it and other environmental laws. The Clean Air Act identified 6 criteria pollutants: ozone, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, lead, and particulate matter for regulation by EPA. These pollutants endanger public health and welfare, come from a variety of sources, and are common throughout the U.S. Further, EPA was charged with setting those standards for each. These are known as the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS. They're health-based standards that are regularly reviewed, and as our understanding of those health impacts evolve, are strengthened as needed over time to remain protective of public health. In a nutshell, implementing the NAAQS is a statutorily mandated, continuous public health improvement plan, and attaining and maintaining those standards are a core part of our mission. We do this through something called cooperative federalism, and here's where you all come into play. EPA sets the standards and then leaves it under the Clean Air Act to state and local agencies, just like ours, to develop the rules, regulations, programs, and plans to meet that standard. The board, as our regulatory authority, finalizes those rules, promulgates and adopts them, and that plan gets put into action. In Louisville, our biggest ambient air quality challenges have historically been ozone, sulfur dioxide, and particulate matter. Next slide, please, Andy. So sulfur dioxide not only harms human health itself, but it also plays a role in particulate matter formation, another criteria pollutant. So it's a twofer. Comes out and it itself can harm human health, but it also secondarily forms particulate matter. Not a good thing. In 2014, levels of sulfur dioxide in Louisville were twice the national ambient air quality standard. We were about 149 parts per billion for that year. Next slide, Andy. This is really a remarkable trend. We are now at a design value this year of about 15 parts per billion. That's below a national ambient air quality standard of 75. With that in mind, getting here is an important part of the story. We were designated as non-attainment, not meeting the standard, and the Clean Air Act opened up a lot of tools in our toolbox to reduce this pollutant. Being designated non-attainment under the Clean Air Act isn't a punishment. It's part of the continuous improvement process that I mentioned earlier. It's really progress. Non-attainment, again, opens up new tools in our regulatory toolbox. In this case, Cane Run Generating Station converted from coal to natural gas, and the coal-fired Mill Creek Generating Station added on additional controls in 2016 to meet the new National Ambient Air Quality Standard for sulfur dioxide and also comply with the Mercury and Air Toxics Rule. Thereafter, a study was done here in Louisville. It's titled Improved Asthma Outcomes Observed in the Vicinity of Coal Power Plant Retirement, Retrofit, and Conversion to Natural Gas, and reported in the journal Nature, that showed that emissions controls installations, and these were about two $1 billion projects each, so a $2 billion investment in air quality, actually reduced asthma burden related to hospitalizations and emergency room visits at the zip code level, and also reduced individual level medication use as measured by digital medication sensors for people who live right here in Louisville. Those are results from our community. Next slide, please. Ozone, of course, is an unusual criteria pollutant in that it's not directly emitted, like sulfur dioxide or even particulate matter. It's formed in the ambient air when nitrogen oxides combine with combine with volatile organic compounds in the presence of sunlight during our ozone season, March to October. Our air monitoring staff are currently working to get ready to begin monitoring ozone again here in the near future. Next slide, please. Nitrogen oxides, again, are a directly emitted pollutant, so they are one of the precursors also for ozone formation. They act as an irritant affecting the eyes, nose, throat, and respiratory tract. They're products of combustion. Next slide, please. And volatile organic compounds are a class that can also be air toxics. So they can cause cancer and non-carcinogenic impacts. And they're emitted from a variety of sources, not just stationary sources like rubber town, but also home cleaning products. Nail polish is a good example of a volatile organic compound, and of course, vehicles, both from the fueling and also the combustion of that fuel. Okay, next slide, please, Andy. On its own, exposure to ozone can irritate your lungs. Sometimes it's described as a lot like having a sunburn of your lungs. It aggravates lung disease and increases frequency of asthma attacks. Next slide, please. So here's our trend, and you can see we've kind of bounced around as that National Ambient Air Quality Standard, which are those colored blocks, have been strengthened over time. That's partly due to the fact that we can't control the weather. We control emissions of nitrogen oxides, and we can control emissions of volatile organic compounds. But this is a very weather-dependent pollutant. In the summertime, I know everybody hates it when I say this, when it's hot and muggy here in Louisville, most people think that the air quality is bad. That humidity actually has a beneficial effect on ozone. It scrubs ozone. So when it's hot and humid, it actually has the potential to form less ozone, which is better for your health. So sweat a little for me and enjoy the humidity. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, Andy, go back one. I meant to say, we're currently meeting this standard. And of course, we are working on our redesignation request, which we'll be submitting to US EPA later this spring. One of our first steps that we needed to complete earlier this year was the early certification of our ozone data. And for us, that included not just our ozone season data of March to October, but because we operate an N-core multi-pollutant site at Cannons Lane that monitors ozone year-round, we were also required to fully certify our full year's worth of data. And our air monitoring team did an outstanding job of really dropping everything else to focus on getting that data certified early. And a tremendous amount of work on their part and a tremendous effort. They are, as I said, getting ready now to begin monitoring for ozone. They are also being sure that our PAMS, our photochemical assessment monitoring system at Cannons Lane, is ready to begin its monitoring during June. And then finally, they are certifying all of our other data for submittal to EPA by May 1st. So they've been a really busy team and just a really great team for APCD. Next slide, Andy. Okay, so particulate matter is kind of a tricky one too. It comes out and you can think of particulate like maybe from a wood smoke fire. It creates crusty material or dusty material, but particulate matter can also be droplets of liquid in the air, a condensable particulate matter. And we look at those for both coarse, that's PM10, and then fine, or PM2.5. Those are those smaller particles that can cross your blood-brain barrier. Next slide, please. So again, particulate matters can be a primary emission directly emitted from a source, or they can be that secondary type of formation when gases, whether that's sulfur dioxide or nitrogen oxide in the air, are emitted and react. I did want to mention that with COVID, we've all learned a number of very unusual lessons, but on this one, particulate matter and fine particulates specifically have been identified in some research as a possible COVID carrier. And that research is looking at whether or not the virus is actually attaching to a particle in the air, or whether the virus acts as an accelerator for lung damage to people whose lungs have already been exposed to high levels of particulate matter. So, new and emerging research there as well. Next slide, Andy. So, health effects of particulate matter, a whole host of potential illnesses. Next slide. So here's our fine particle trend. The last time that this standard was strengthened was in 2012. Our standard is currently 12 micrograms per cubic meter. And you can see that we are below that standard. We are meeting the fine particle standard. However, in June of 2021, EPA announced that it would reconsider the current 2012 NAAQS on the basis that the available scientific evidence and technical information indicate that the current national ambient air quality standard of 12 micrograms per cubic meter may not adequately protect public health and welfare. Recently, the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee, or CASAC, sent a letter to EPA recommending that the current standard of 12 micrograms be lowered or strengthened, is another way to consider it, to 8 to 10 micrograms per cubic meter to reduce risks to human health. EPA expects to issue a proposed rule later this summer and a final rule in spring of 2023. As part of that, EPA will be seeking information and taking public input on the proposed standard, potential health impacts, and environmental justice concerns. Keep in mind, please, that children, people with heart or lung conditions, and people of color are disproportionately impacted by exposure to particulate matter nationally. And as a result, in my conversation with the Board of Health, I asked that they, with their mission as champion of equitable physical, behavioral, and environmental health, use that unique opportunity during this upcoming rulemaking to share their concerns about particulate matter concentrations and how those concentrations may impact the health and well-being of Louisvillians. They have a wealth of data, and sharing that data will be informative and helpful for US EPA and beneficial for our residents. So we'll be reaching out to the Board of Health to submit comments on the strengths of the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for particulate matter when EPA's public comment period opens later this summer. The board and the district may also make comments during that rulemaking, and I invite us all, as this proceeds, to think about how that could benefit us. Next slide, Andy. So this brings us to a slide you may have seen for the last, I think we've been using this particular slide since I started in 2009. And it generally has some red on it. You'll note it's got a little lighter green down there with ozone, and that's because we are currently meeting that standard, but we have not been redesignated yet by US EPA to attainment. We will be submitting that package to US EPA later this spring, and we hope to see it approved this summer. And for a short period of time, this will all be green. Louisville is attaining all 6 of the criteria pollutants. But as I mentioned, the Clean Air Act is a continuous improvement plan. Congress intended for it to be a way to measure progress with improving air quality. When EPA adopts a new standard, if it's 10 micrograms, we may have a little bit of work to do. If it's 8, we and many areas across the country may have a lot of work to do. So again, when we're redesignated, we'll have it all green. When it changes and some of these are marked as non-attainment, that's not a failure. That's progress. That is what the Clean Air Act is intended to do. It opens up new tools in our toolbox to develop that plan together, put that plan in action, and to attain the standard. Next slide, please, Andy. I did want to mention to the board also about air toxics, because one of their requests of us was to understand how our work impacts people in their term vulnerable neighborhoods. For us, through redlining, through the development of Rubbertown in World War II, we have clusters of synthetic chemical manufacturing with communities surrounding them, fence-line communities. Air toxics are an important part of our work here at the district, and we, unlike our state or federal counterparts, are able to develop a local program to address that local need. And that's the Strategic Toxic Air Reduction Program that the board put in place. Air toxics can be metals, particulate matter. Here in Louisville, many of them are also volatile organic compounds. They are all, with the exception of a handful, hazardous air pollutants under the Clean Air Act, and for our purposes, we call them toxic air contaminants. They have a variety of health impacts, non-carcinogenic impacts, including reproductive issues or developmental, respiratory, and other associated health problems, and they may also be carcinogens. Next slide, please. The STAR program that was developed in 2005 and adopted by the board at the time is really a very successful community engagement and community-led process. In response to growing community concern about toxic air emissions in West Louisville, APCD developed and the board adopted the STAR program. It is designed to require the reduction of toxic air emissions by the largest industries, and it was created after the West Louisville air toxic study in 2000 and 2001 found unsafe levels of 18 toxic chemicals, including chloroprene and 1,3-butadiene, present in and around Rubbertown Industrial Complex. Today, STAR is considered one of the most stringent local air toxics regulatory programs in the U.S. It lays out a very specific process for determining the carcinogenic and non-carcinogenic risk of those toxic air contaminants. It establishes stringent environmental acceptability goals for individual and cumulative air toxics risk and requires companies to demonstrate that their emissions meet those goals, and then incorporates that demonstration as permit conditions and requirements. STAR is a do, not a did. It's something that our staff do every day. It's not a one-time demonstration, but an ongoing obligation for the sources subject to the program. Among other things, sources have to show that their current emissions comply with their permit on a regular basis, that new or modified equipment also comply, and they have to take steps to further reduce emissions if the risk associated with the toxic air contaminant increases. Next slide, please. Just very briefly, this is a nice slide from a visual perspective. Overall, air toxic emissions from 2000 to 2019 have dropped about 70%. And that's broken up there in chemical manufacturing, which is the darker blue, and then electric generating utility contaminants is the lighter blue. Next slide, please. These are the Category 1 toxic air contaminants. These are the 18 chemicals of concern that were identified during that West Louisville air toxic study as having a risk greater than 1 in a million. What you see is a way to look at this in terms of mass. This is based on emission reductions. That's an easy way for us to talk to people about what has the STAR program done. It's reduced X tons of emissions. Next slide, please. But there's really a better way to look at this, and that is in its reduction of risk. This slide, you'll see, of course, that the vestiges of redlining. We have a clustered synthetic chemical manufacturing complex in an environmental justice area, as that would be defined through EJ. Next slide, please. And I know it's really hard to see on small screens, and for that, I apologize. But in the 2005 map, which is here on the left, the maximum risk, which is that yellow color, is about 355 in a million. That lighter blue color was about 5 in a million over towards the east part of Jefferson County. In 2014, what you see is the risk in the formerly riskiest areas has dropped to about 12 in a million, while other parts of the county have dropped to below 1 in a million. And that's the risk from point sources. That's the risk from our Rubbertown and other industrial facilities here in Louisville, those that are subject to STAR. So it's been very effective. In fact, what you see there is about a 96% reduction between those 2 years. With that in mind, our work, particularly with respect to new and emerging contaminants, cumulative environmental impacts, past land development practices, and the ongoing impact of air toxics on fence-line communities remains. And so I wanted to express my thanks to this board for always being here to assist the district with its work and for being committed to the public health of Louisville residents. Next slide, please, Andy. At the end of my presentation, I was asked essentially, what would I do to improve our work if I could do anything? And that was a great question, and it's one I wish I had a little bit more time to answer on. But my first thought was, I'd like to see us move to a multi-pollutant model when considering the national ambient air quality standards. And that would include air toxics. This would allow for us to get a lot of bang for the buck and provide a comprehensive reduction platform as opposed to we're going to focus on this pollutant at this point and this pollutant at this point, and kind of that chipping away, which has been very successful over the last 50 years. So I'm not going to knock it, but we've got a lot of the low-hanging fruit, and it may be time for us to really take a hard look at whether or not a multi-pollutant strategy would allow us to be more effective more quickly at a lower cost. So, locally, our recent multi-pollutant stakeholder work with ozone shows that the strategy can be effective, and that work has established a great foundation already for the upcoming particulate matter work that lies ahead. So, with that, I'll leave you with the thought that we're all meeting the National Ambient Air Quality Standards today, and that's due to the very successful work of the board and also of the staff at the district and the community and the regulated community as well. Any questions?
Director Hamilton, you had mentioned they were monitoring of ozone during the winter. And I'm just curious, what kind of concentrations did you see?
Billy DeWitt or Brian Paris, can you help answer that question? We only report the ozone season data to the board, and that's in your board reports, but
Right.
Andy, if you could find Billy or Brian Paris.
Ms. Hamilton, you mentioned that the ozone season starts April and ends in October.
Starts in March.
Oh, starts in March?
We monitor in March. Companies will report in April, but we monitor in March.
Okay, thank you.
I have a few questions, Ms. Hamilton.
Yes.
This is just for general background, out of curiosity. For sulfur dioxide, you showed remarkable reductions in the hourly concentrations from 2000 and 2021. I wonder concerning the annual standard, which we used to be in effect, but no longer in effect. But just out of curiosity, I believe, as I recall, 10, 20 years ago, annual average concentrations in Louisville were around 10 parts per billion, something like that. So I wonder, during this time, have there also been, I'm sure there's been a reduction in the annual average concentration, but I wonder if it is as remarkable as in the 1 hour standard.
I don't know if Billy or Brian will have an answer for that one, but we can take a look at that. That might take a little bit more work. I do see that Andy has elevated them, so if we can open the floor up, Billy.
It does take a second for their audio to catch up if they haven't, and I don't see an audio connection yet, so I will check on that. Can y'all hear me?
Oh. Hi, Brian.
Hey, yeah, this is Brian. And yeah, I'm not sure if Billy's connected. I can tackle a couple of those briefly. So first off, I think it was Mr. Sullivan's question about ozone concentrations in the winter. We typically don't see ozone get above 50 parts per billion in the winter. A lot of times it's kind of in the 20 to 40 ppb range.
Thank you.
And then I didn't catch the second question. Sorry. It was
From
Dr.
Mr.
Coburn.
From me.
Yeah, from Dr. Coburn, I believe.
Yeah, I wondered what has been the change in the annual average concentration of SO2 for Louisville over the same time period as the graph showed for the hourly standard. In other words, from about I think the graph showed from about 2010 to the present time. Whether that has been reduced dramatically. I think around 2010, I'm guessing it would be about 10 parts per billion. So has that gone down to, say, 2 parts per billion annual average, or 5 or 7 or what?
So we actually don't routinely track the annual average on a regular basis. So I don't have
Oh,
a number for you right now. But yeah, I don't want to guess what that number is, but I mean, it would certainly be probably in the 0 to 4 range. But we can certainly give some more specific numbers.
yeah, if you can, I'd appreciate it.
And Dr. Cohen, you raise a really good point, and I just want to touch on it real quickly. So the averaging period for these pollutants and their how they comply with the National Ambient Air Quality Standard are very important features of their public health impact. That annual standard of 10 may have been appropriate at its time, but based on new science, what we understand is that even short-term exposures to high levels of sulfur dioxide can have significant public health impacts. And so it was changed to a 1-hour standard of 75 parts per billion. So if you just look at the numbers, you might think that it got less stringent or less protective of public health, when in fact it's just the opposite. It's more tightly controlled as a pollutant so that there are no high peaks, and it's just vastly more stringent, as the companies will tell you, than an annual standard. It's vastly more protective of public health, even though that number may be higher. The averaging periods matter. And that is one thing with the particulate matter standard that will be coming out for public comment later this year. At this point, the CASAC, Clean Air Science Advisory Committee, has recommended that EPA retain the current averaging periods. But that may also be a place where we see some comment from others about changing that averaging period, not just the microgram number.
Right. Yeah. Well, for PM10, there's 2 standards, or I'm sorry, PM 2.5, there's 2 standards, right? An annual and
Yes.
24-hour. And
Yes.
so you said the annual, they're considering lowering to 8 to 10. How about the 24-hour, which is 35? Are they considering lowering that, or?
I haven't
changing
seen
that?
anything definitive on that. I have heard rumors that that may also be a recommendation.
I see. And while we're on that, on ozone, I seem to recall that there was some discussion a few years ago, or even plans to lower that standard based on recent research, and that I haven't read anything about it in the newspaper lately, but I wonder what's in the works there. You may know.
It is in the works. EPA is reconsidering that standard as well, and their current plan is that they will be proposing a possible change to the ozone standard in the spring and summer of 2023. So this year we'll get a proposal on PM. Next year we may see a proposal on ozone.
Okay, well, that's it for my questions. Thank you very much, and thanks for a good and informative presentation.
Rachel, I can give a more specific number for the SO2 annual average if you'd like.
Thank you.
So just for our Watson Lane site, which is typically one of the higher sites, the annual average for 2021 was 0.45 ppb. That data would still be considered preliminary, but that's the average that we're looking at.
For which side?
That is our Watson Lane site.
Watson Lane. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's near Mill Creek.
Yes.
plant. Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly significant.
And
Good,
thank you. Thank you, Rachel, also. I did have some other kind of questions looking forward regarding ozone. So I didn't know about the humidity, so that was a new piece of information for me. But what I was wondering is, I mean, I know that we're monitoring the levels and such, but are we doing the other parameters that affect the production, in terms of, the temperature, the number of sunshine hours, because those are, what produce ozone. So that way, I mean, I know like global warming is like, we're talking about decades and such, but still, going forward, since we anticipate more before the levels get, or the standards get more stringent, I would think that we should be monitoring that to try to anticipate it.
Billy, if you could help explain our regular ozone monitoring and also our enhanced monitoring at Cannons Lane.
Sure, if you can hear me okay.
Good.
Yes, well, with our criteria pollutant and ozone monitoring stations, we also naturally monitor a lot of meteorological parameters and also submit that data to EPA. And as part of the new photochemical assessment monitoring, we're now monitoring for VOCs that are precursors to ozone, but we've also added some enhanced meteorological instrumentation to give us a better idea on conditions of the atmosphere that form ozone. For instance, we have a salometer that measures, the height of the mixing layer in the atmosphere, which, it gives us an idea of how stagnant conditions are. So those type of things give us information, and really it makes it easier for the photochemical modelers on a national and regional level to sort of predict ozone and ozone trends moving forward. In addition to that, Brian Paris is sort of our lead on day-to-day ozone forecasting. So he looks into meteorological conditions that would affect the normal forecast, and then how that would affect our ozone forecast. And if work with Indiana Department of Environmental Management on calling those air quality action days.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Hamilton, thank you for an excellent scorecard regarding the national ambient air quality standard. We are moving in the right direction. I only have one comment, but we've seen a significant decrease in SO2 and NOx emissions here in Jefferson County. I'm curious, how does that correlate with the number of asthma and respiratory problems we've had in Jefferson County? We used to track at, the task force used to track at. So I'm gonna give a call to the health department and see if we've seen a decrease in the number of asthma and respiratory problems.
Chairman Hilton, as I mentioned, and I'll send a link to the board members, there's actually been a study that was reported in the journal Nature that has found that correlation, that with our reductions in sulfur dioxide here in Jefferson County, there is a reduction in emergency room visits. And equally as important, they were able to use cell phones essentially to attach a telemetric device to an asthma inhaler that allowed for tracking of when and where a group of participants were using and having to use their emergency asthma medication. That too has been decreased following the reduction in SO2. So I'll send a link to that paper to you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from board members? If not, again, thank you for an excellent presentation, Ms. Hamilton. Moving right along, we at the our across the data. Are there any questions or comments regarding the our across the data reports that you received? I think we talked about ozone and quite a few.
Yeah, actually, on some of the papers that we received, I mean, there's some explanation, but I still don't think I understand fully the part about the VOC data summary. And then the columns on towards the right where it talked about the star BACs and then the cancer and then chronic non-cancer. I mean, I didn't really understand what those numbers and what the columns really meant.
So those are actually the benchmark ambient concentrations are used in the Strategic Toxic Air Reduction Program to show the concentration that's equivalent of a risk of 1 in a million for cancer. So that concentration is used when we assess a site's chemicals. And maybe the best way for me to describe it is this. Not all volatile organic compounds that are toxic air contaminants are equally as risky. Some, for example, are very risky, and you see they have a very low concentration that equals that risk of 1 in a million. That's based on their toxicity. Others don't have a very low number because they have been determined by other experts to be less toxic. So it's a way for us to kind of use a normalized unit of measurement to compare apples to apples, concentration to risk. That's what that's there for. The non-cancer, all of the toxic air contaminants have non-carcinogenic impacts. Not all of them are carcinogenic, but all of them do have some non-carcinogenic impact. That's there just for reference so that you can see the concentration to what we would use as that benchmark 1 in a million risk for cancer or a hazard quotient of 1 for a non-carcinogen.
Okay.
So the particular data set, this is still related to the pilot project? And I'm curious, what's the progress of that pilot project?
So we have 2 auto GCs.
Right.
2 automatic glass chromatographs. One is in operation at Algonquin Parkway, and that's focused on the volatile organic compounds that we identified as the Category 1 tax in STAR, those 18 chemicals of primary concern. Out of that same equipment is also being required to be used at our Cannons Lane air monitoring site to assess the concentration of volatile organic compounds in our air as precursors of ozone. That project at Cannons Lane is now, and Billy, please feel free to step in, it is functional and complete. We've installed, I think with the exception of possibly some formaldehyde-based equipment, that we've installed all the equipment that's necessary for us to report for volatile organic compounds as precursors.
We also measure for the aldehydes there as well, the carbonyls.
Thank you. So that is still a work in progress in this way. That equipment is still new. It still has challenges with respect to its data completeness. And again, Billy, help me out here. But we're looking forward to fully operating it this year to be able to identify, I think it's 68 volatile organic compounds in their concentrations, Billy?
Yes, there's over 60 that are required to be measured for ozone precursors, and we try to measure both of those compounds at each site, to make an apples to apples comparison, as well as adding some, the typical chemicals of concern from the former air toxic study. And I would say overall, when the program was launched and this technology is first being used in this way, it was really an experiment by EPA, and I give a lot of credit to our chemist and our toxic supervisor for really bringing along this project, and we're getting a really encouraging data set. What we found for the most part is that the amount of data we pull in is really huge, and we have to expand our capacity and our ability to assess that data and quality assure it before we report it. So that's what we're working on now. We continue to be enthusiastic about the technology. We're just trying to get a handle on, the sheer amount of data that's coming in.
Can you give an estimate, Billy, in terms of size of data of just a general year's worth of monitoring with this equipment?
I'm not sure I can do it in a point by point, but just as reference that, our typical monitors, an ozone monitor gives us an hourly average for ozone, and these instruments give us hourly averages for over 60 compounds. So, and all of these compounds have to be ensured that they are coming off the detector at the correct time so that identification is correct. And then, of course, if there's interference in the atmosphere, several compounds could come off at once. And so the chemist has to identify whether there's multiple compounds getting burned off and it's not a true number. So there's a significant amount of post-processing on each chromatogram that is produced every hour. So that's the process we're going through, is to refine that, and we're sort of doing it month by month and catching up a bit at a time.
So our equipment is ready. We believe that our air monitoring quality assurance staff, we've added 2 new staff members recently in order to be able to improve the time we have spent trying to be sure that this is good quality data, so that we shorten that time frame. And if we could clone our air monitoring chemist, I think we would do that, and I'm pretty sure that US EPA would buy a copy. Bechtel and the manufacturer of this equipment would also pay dearly to have an Andrea Cooley, our air monitoring chemist, on their staff. So this is a nascent project from US EPA. With our ozone equipment, for example, it's really robust. We know what to expect from it in terms of its maintenance and its operation, and it's just a really solid piece of equipment for us. This is new. And again, credit to Billy, Brian Paris, Andrea Cooley, Tom Laub. Their staff have done a remarkable job becoming national leaders in operating this equipment. So it may surprise you to know that EPA calls us for the answers, but that is what happens.
Moving right along, do we have any questions regarding the enforcement status report from board members? Also, the excess emission report. Any questions, comments? And the last one is the complaint investigation status summary. Any questions, comments, report on those reports? If not, thanks everyone. I will adjourn the monthly meeting of the board. And thank you for your participation. The next board meeting is Wednesday, March 16th at 10 a.m. Thanks everyone. Have a safe and enjoyable day.
I'm sorry, I had one more question. I thought there was going to be part of this meeting, is that, because I missed last month's meeting, and that's when we sort of had the things with the Comores and the public comments, and I thought that there's going to be a response, or additional update on this meeting.
I'd be happy to give I'm sorry, Chairman Hilton, may I provide an update?
Yes, you can. Did everyone receive a copy of the comments that the district received, Ms. Hampton? Did the board members?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you can.
So the district, as I mentioned at the last board meeting, we had a public meeting with over 45 participants, and we received more than 68 comments from the public. We are in the process of preparing that response to comment document, Dr. May. When we have done so, we will publish it on our final actions page, along with a copy of any final permit that we may issue. We'll send that out via Gov Delivery, so the board will be notified, and we'll also be sure that we send you just a personal copy of the response to comment document and any proposed permit at that time. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hampton. Yeah. Well,
Thank you, Chairman Hilton, for letting me interrupt you.
that's okay. No, that was a good question, really. I just want to make sure everyone had gotten the comments from the district. I'm still reviewing those comments, but we look forward to hearing the answers and some of the feedback you're going to give back to the company, Mrs. Hampton. Thank you very much. Everyone have a safe day.
Bye.
Bye.